Hello everybody, happy Friday. Really in the Championship grind now. Norwich City back in action on Saturday at Carrow Road. Luton Town, the visitors to Norfolk. Obviously looking forward to that game. It's another opportunity for Norwich to build off some positive results in the last couple of games. Adam Harvey, joined by my colleague Samuel Seaman for your preview show. Of course, we want your comments, questions, score predictions as we go throughout the show, and we'll work our way through those. Sam, before we maybe talk team news and this game, let's just reflect a little bit on the week that's been so far. I mean, we sat here this time last week discussing that West Brom game, and Norwich were recorded 3 straight defeats just there before the international break. 4 points since then, 6-1 pummeling of Plymouth on Tuesday night. Sainz has got another hat-trick. I mean, everything feels a lot more rosy.
Yeah, it does. It feels positive in so many different ways. And I think it's a relief that Norwich have done that with a couple of good performances as well as results. I mean, when you win 6-1, it's hard to do that without producing a pretty good performance. But the fact that they've managed to come out of this period with sort of some semblance of the team that we saw a couple of months ago, rather than just grinding it out and managing to finally get the points over the line, even with those injured players, I think is really encouraging. And for me, it's shown so many themes that Norwich fans would have been relieved to see. You know, I'm sure we'll obviously get stuck into all of those, but it felt like last season when they didn't have Josh Sargent, even losing that one player meant that they had to almost be a completely different team, and they looked like a completely different squad of players. But I think what we've seen over the last couple of games is that this is a sustainable system that will produce regardless of injuries, obviously to a point. And when you're missing, 5 or 6 key players as they were a couple of weeks ago, then it's always going to be hard. But I think we've seen over these last 2 games that this is a system that's built to last, and not necessarily just with Josh Sargent. So yeah, plenty of good themes going into this Luton game. It feels like everyone's a little bit more positive again, and after the last few weeks and some of the struggles that Norwich have had, I think they really, really needed that. So, nice to feel the positivity around the club again, definitely. And it feels like there's a real sense of momentum, even after just 2 good results going into this weekend's game.
Yeah, staying on the theme of positives, let's talk a little bit around the team news and some of that good news coming out of yesterday's press conference. Of course, we've got Kellen Fisher back from suspension for this game tomorrow. We'll speak a little bit about the fullbacks in just a moment. But, of course, we've got Jose Cordoba. Looks like there's a chance he might potentially be on the bench as well tomorrow, which should be obviously a boost moving forward to that QPR game at Loftus Road next Saturday as well. And, of course, the big one, which I'm just going to play the clip now of Torres speaking a little bit about him, a certain Chilean midfielder.
Still the plan, Núñez available for this weekend?
Yeah.
So he's had a good week now, good week of team training, no issues. Still got that smile on his face.
Yeah, he was electric when he was out there the first day, and he's running around. We just have to be very, very careful with him, because I think if we asked him now, he will be able to play 90 minutes on Saturday. So, but he will be in, and it's just good to have him back in the group.
But on that point, without wanting to sort of push you, I mean, would it be too ambitious to start him at a game at this stage, or could he physically, you think, handle that now, a start?
I think it would be too ambitious because, like I said, I don't think we should do anything that is too risky. We need to nice and easy build him in again, and for him to find his way into the team again. Because again, of course, it's an important one on Saturday, but it's also an important one the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that, and we need to make sure that we have as many players available for the Christmas period as possible.
Yeah, there we go. Of course, looks like Núñez is going to be involved tomorrow, probably more likely on the bench than from the start. I've seen a few people sort of coming in with comments around that. Thomas saying a midfield of Slimani, McLean and Núñez. I think that's probably one maybe more for QPR than tomorrow. Jeffman, I'd agree with your assessment. Good day, gents. I hope we don't risk Núñez unnecessarily. Build him up slowly to full fitness. I rate McLean, Slimani, Marcondes as the midfield free for tomorrow. To go back to your point there, Jeffman, Paddy did have a little bit of a sore throat yesterday. I think he's got a little bit of a cold and flu, so hopefully he's back to full fitness for tomorrow's game. Sam, on that, I mean, where do you sort of map that midfield, I suppose, for tomorrow? Because as Jeffman says there, Núñez, you don't want to, running him back into this team too quickly, because he's such a key player, and with the volume of games coming ahead now into this Christmas festive period, we can't afford to lose him again.
Yeah, and I think Torup underlined that when he admitted, quite openly that it would be too ambitious. And I think even if there was a slight chance that he's was going to start and that Torop was thinking about it, then, you know, at least you maybe throw those Luton analysts into a little bit of doubt by saying that, you know, it's going to be a 50-50 choice. So yeah, I think definitely he'll be on the bench tomorrow. And I think the good news from the last few weeks is that Norwich are in a position where they can afford to do that. I think we saw going into the Stoke game quite how important he was at that point in the season. And, you know, there's no doubting the quality that he's got. But at that point, it felt like Norwich really had no alternative. But now, even without Nunez, it feels like they'll go into this game with quite a strong midfield. Of course, they had the three of Sorensen, McLean and Marcondes for that Plymouth game, and that performed pretty well. An error from Sorensen, but I actually thought he was fairly solid for the first 30 or 40 minutes. And then he came off for Slimane, Slimane came on later in the game, and he scores his first goal for the club. Looks pretty good throughout as well. And now I think Torop actually has a bit of a decision on his hands, and I'm writing a piece on this as we speak, actually, that there is a bit of a dilemma for Torop, almost from a position where the midfield was looking pretty weak and like he was struggling to even put three midfielders on the pitch. People were talking about Callum Doyle going in there or maybe a three at the back. To go from that to this situation where one of a few good players is going to have to sit on the bench, and it looks like a pretty good situation for Torop to be in. If I had to guess now, the midfield that he'd go for, and I went for this on tactics board, it would be McLean, Slimane and Marcondes, because I think when you throw them into the mix as well as Sorensen, I think that natural three that he wants, and I don't think we'll see the 2 and the 1 very often this season or under Torop. I think the natural three, that three sort of works for him quite well, and all of them are in pretty good form. The real decision is probably next weekend against QPR, when hopefully Nunez has a few more match minutes under his belt and he's available to start. Then what do you do? Because one of McLean, Slimane or Marcondes is going to have to be dropped if you want to start him. And all of those have been pretty good. I'd say Marcondes has actually looked pretty indispensable for Norwich over the last few weeks. So, yeah, it feels like now that squad depth is actually looking quite good when you consider the choices that Torop has in defence as well. Some of the players who might have to miss out when Cordoba is able to start again. So actually, I think there are a few decisions for Torop to make, and I'm sure he's very pleased that the squad is in a position where he can do that. But yeah, for this weekend, I'd say probably McLean, Slimane and Marcondes is the one that probably a lot of people will expect. And if I had to guess, then I think that's what he'll do tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah, we spoke there about kind of the bolstered midfield options, but there's one player that looks like he's now not going to be involved for the next 10 weeks. It's a huge blow again. Of course, Liam Gibbs, who returned back in the team in terms of as an option off the bench for the West Brom game. He came on obviously against Plymouth, and within sort of less than 10 minutes, pulls up when he sort of was getting into sort of just to the wide of the goal. He was looking to try and put the ball back across, and you could kind of see from that moment straight away the fact he was signalling to be substituted. It didn't look good. Torop said that they were having it scanned yesterday, but it's the same hamstring as before. Kind of suspect he's going to be 10 plus weeks out. Obviously, they don't know about surgery yet, but mentally for the lad, I mean, that's a huge blow again, Sam, because, you know, just as you think you're going to get back into it, it's another almost similar feeling to what he's had before.
Yeah, and I think just like you could feel the emotion around Carrow Road when Sienats scored his goal and how happy everyone was for him, you could feel that sympathy as he was walking around the side of the pitch, and he looked like he was nearly in tears, and you can completely understand that because it's not just the last few weeks that he's missed out on. Obviously came back in that West Brom game, but there was also a similar situation last season when he had to miss out on the run-in and then the playoffs because he pulled up with another issue. I think that was with the quad, if I remember correctly. So the same sort of area of his body, and that was done a few minutes after coming on as a substitute as well. So I'm sure he's absolutely sick and tired of injuries. And yeah, I think for him it's been really difficult because I think he won the Young Player of the Season award for Norwich a few seasons ago. Looked like a really solid midfield option, and I remember thinking at that point, you know, he's a decent, solid Championship midfielder, and maybe you never watched him and thought he's going to go to a Premier League club for 15 million plus. But you looked at him as somebody who maybe in future could play that Kenny McLean role, could give Norwich a lot in that area of the pitch. And now, you know, he's had a couple of years under David Wagner, who saw him as a sort of striking wide option. I know Torop has tried him out wide a little bit as well, but it felt like Norwich had a system where he would be able to thrive again and he'd be able to play in that sort of position that he wanted. And he's barely been able to play. So, yeah, I think it's understandable that he's really gutted, and he took to Instagram to sort of speak about that a little bit. And it did sound very much like he's going through it a little bit at the moment. But he also sounded positive about the future. And obviously, when something like this happens, there's absolutely nothing you can do apart from focusing on recovery and doing everything you can to be back at your best when you return. So, yeah, obviously, wish him well, feel for him massively. But yeah, it's a crushing blow for him. And I think you could see that from his reaction on Tuesday night.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit now about that sort of fullback debate maybe for tomorrow. Obviously, Ben Crozene stepped in at left back for that game against Plymouth with Kellen Fisher suspended. We saw him obviously occupy that same role against West Brom. As Torp said at the time, that was more with the view that Fellows is a dangerous winger, and he felt that Kellen Fisher could do a good job with sort of dealing with him as a player and his threat. I mean, he's back involved tomorrow. Stacey, obviously, we've seen in recent games, his form's been really consistent, very positive. I mean, Torp kind of spoke a little bit yesterday around him and the fact they've had to adapt his game a little bit, and maybe they're starting to sort of see the positive signs of that now, the way he stepped in for the fourth goal. Yeah, it seems like he's starting to grasp it as a bit now. I mean, where's your head at for tomorrow? Do you see Ben Crozene dropping straight back out? Do you see Fisher coming in for Stacey? Where's your sort of, I suppose, your sort of head at for that one?
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think a lot of the time this season, it's been quite hard to judge that sort of back four really in its entirety, because you've got Shane Duffy in there who seems to be the one who's guaranteed that right centre-back position. But then aside from that, everyone plays into everyone else's positions, because you've got Callum Doyle there who can play left centre-back or left back. You've got Kellen Fisher, who then that affects because he can play left back or right back. And Jack Stacey is pulled into that debate as a result. So it's been tough on probably more than half of the times Norwich have played this season to actually guess what that back four is going to be. But based purely on the performances of the last few weeks and how those players have been playing, it feels to me like out of that back four, Crozene is the only one you can really afford to drop out of it, because you've got Callum Doyle, who's looked much better since the international break, not only in that centre-back role, but also Torop spoke about a sort of knock for him in the weeks going into that. You've got Shane Duffy, who seems to be improving again after a few tough weeks, I'd say. You've got Jack Stacey, who's come back in and done absolutely fantastically. 3 assists in his last 2 games since coming back in, and looks like he provides a real threat. Then on the other side, you've got Crozene, who, I've sung his praises a few times this season. And I think me and you have both said that we were surprised maybe when Torp spoke about him losing form, because he's always done a fairly solid job. But unfortunately, at the moment, with how some of his teammates are performing, solid doesn't seem to be getting you into the starting lineup. So I feel like Torp will want Fisher and Stacey in there. And the only way you can really do that at the moment is by having Stacey out on that right side with a more advanced role, and then having Fisher at left back. So yeah, I would say it probably will be Fisher at left back, but again, there's just so many elements going into it, and I suppose that's what Torp likes. And they've spoken at times, and I remember him speaking about in the summer about the transfers and the fact that they were bringing in players who they wanted to play in different positions. And sometimes when you hear that, the alarm bells start going off, because you start wondering if it's a sort of jack of all trades, master of none type situation. But I think we're all seeing the benefits now of having a number of players who can play in different roles. And yeah, it does definitely make for interesting team news most weeks. So yeah, I think that's what he'll do, but I'm not absolutely sure. What about you, Adam? Do you think it'll be Fisher and Stacey?
That's probably where my head's at the moment. Just feel kind of from the answer he gave yesterday around Crozene, and his performance wasn't obviously remotely negative, but I just kind of got the vibe that maybe they still see him as more of a longer term project than sort of here and now. He's the main man for sort of starting in that left back role. But Jeff actually makes an interesting point here. Saw a shout on Twitter suggesting Stacey could do a job at right wing. Thoughts? I mean, obviously Forson's been in there for the last couple of games. Maybe not naturally a right winger in the sense that he's not quick, he's not going to be beating a man, but certainly been improving. And I think we've seen a lot of positive signs from his performances. I mean, that's an interesting point there, because Stacey, in terms of sort of the athleticism, the ability to get in behind, we saw the ball obviously for Marcondes, the assist he got against West Brom. clearly got the attributes. And I think that's actually a position he's played previously in his career. So, I mean, given that Norwich have maybe struggled a little bit with that right wing position, is that maybe something that Torp could toy with a little bit?
I think it could be an option, but I don't see him doing it really from the start. I think Stacey is better as an option, maybe finding a bit of space out wide. And usually what happens, especially in a sort of possession-based team, and especially in Torp's system, is that the right winger takes a lot of the defender's attention and comes inside, and then maybe occupies the left back, and the centre backs have got an eye on them as well. And then that means space out wide for the fullback. And I'm not sure Stacey would really thrive in an environment where there's a bit more defensive attention on him, where he's maybe got to push that back line a little bit as well, and try to get him behind. I don't think that's necessarily his game. I think he's better staying out on the other side while maybe the ball's on the left side, and then being found with a bit more space to attack. And I think as a right winger in Torp's system, you have to maybe operate in smaller spaces. And although Stacey, technically there's absolutely nothing wrong with him, he maybe isn't the sort of tricky player that a Forsen is, or that a Sienats is when they're at their best. So I can see the reasoning, and I think in a more traditional sort of English type setup, that Stacey would be pretty good in that right wing role. But I think in Torp's setup and in a possession-based system, it maybe wouldn't get the best out of him. And there are probably players who can play that role a little bit better.
Yeah, going to ask you about anti-Sienats in just a moment. There's a question here from Tom, just while we're on the theme of wingers. Hi guys, any update on a new deal for Sainz? Has to be a priority to tie him down to a longer-term deal shortly. I mean, the AGM is probably the most recent update we had. Ben Napper kind of said that they're in talks with his representatives. There's kind of, been discussions around trying to secure a new deal. I think it's one that the club are obviously keen to try and do, given, we know the form and the quality that he's got as an individual. Norwich are going to be certainly trying to keep hold of him in January. I mean, Torp, even again on Tuesday night after the Plymouth game, was speaking around just don't want to talk about January, don't want to talk about Borja Sainz on kind of those same conversations, because I think it's inevitable there's going to be bids on the table. But given what Mark Atanasio said in the interview with us post the AGM, he said about, they want to try and keep him here at least till the summer. So I think that's bodes well. But I'd imagine we'll get a little bit more of an update in terms of a new deal when, those discussions have progressed a little bit further down the line. Sam, in terms of anti-Sienats, I mean, we had quite a wide debate on the podcast. We had a debate on the preview show about that number 9 role and maybe who was going to play it. I think we all maybe felt he might switch for Ronaldo Hernandez against Plymouth, but he decides to stick with anti-Sienats, and it paid off, to be fair to him. I thought that was probably his best performance in a number 9 role for Norwich so far. And that confidence, we spoke around kind of the goal and how big that's going to be for him moving forwards. And what can he now do to kick on? Because, it's all good now having that really good positive performance against Plymouth, but it's now about these games coming up, trying to sort of build off that goal, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the good sign is that he has been in those positions, and Torp spoke after West Brom, although it was a pretty poor performance from Sienats, and everyone could see that he lacked the confidence maybe to finish off the chances that he had. I think everyone could see that he was getting in those positions a little bit more. And, there's obviously that cliche that you're more worried when you're not getting the chances than when you're not putting them away. And I think that was borne out a little bit in the Plymouth performance, because again, he was in and around it much more. He was there when the ball dropped in the box, had that header from Krasene's cross that he certainly should have scored, hit the post in the first half as well, and found himself actually setting up teammates from close range a couple of times as well. I think Borja Sainz, probably as good as his hat-trick was, denied Sienats a couple of assists in that first half. The fact that he's getting in those positions is much better. And then for me, so much of that is about confidence, because, as a professional footballer, you get the ball under little pressure in the box. Really, you should be putting those chances away. And I think the only barrier to that for a lot of players is confidence. They can take too long on it, or they start worrying about what if they miss the chance and then the connection isn't great. But I think you saw with that Plymouth goal, because he probably knew that it had been an improved performance overall, when he goes through on goal, there's absolutely no doubt. He just smashes it in at the near post. He looked like somebody who'd already scored 15 goals this season. So I think now that he's got that confidence, it bodes really well that he's getting in those good positions. And I think Norwich will hope to see a little bit more of that against Luton this weekend. So yeah, it's strange how one performance can completely change the debate, because so many people had almost already given up on Cianats after that West Brom game. And, I could understand it to an extent, because you buy someone for 8.5 million and they look that far off it at Championship level. And you can understand why fans had started to get concerned. But so quickly things can change, especially in the Championship. And from one week to the next, he's gone from, a striker who nobody wanted to see in that number 9 position to almost guaranteed to be there against Luton. So yeah, I think he'll be there again this weekend, and against a team that's really been struggling, especially away from home. You'd say he'll get the chances again. If he manages to put them away, then that will be goals in 2 consecutive matches within a few days of each other. And who knows what impact that could have on his Norwich career. So yeah, this feels like a big opportunity for him this weekend. Hopefully it's not a sort of Stoke situation where he scores 1 goal and then goes off the boil a little bit. But to me, that performance against Plymouth felt a bit more sustainable and like the sort of thing that he'll be able to replicate more easily. But you also have to consider the level of the opposition. So yeah, I think everyone will have a keen eye on his performance against Luton. That could be a big part of whether Norwich can win it or not. But also in the bigger picture for his Norwich career, I think it's a big opportunity to really, really get things started.
Yeah, you mentioned the Hatters' struggles there on the road, 5 straight defeats. On their travels, they come to Carrow Road not in the best of form generally. I mean, even their sort of home form's not been great so far this season. They find themselves 16th in the Championship. And anyone who's maybe seen Terrace talk, I spoke to a Luton fan last night, and he kind of spoke around maybe the struggles they're having to adapt back to Championship life. It's their most expensive squad ever, in terms of obviously going up to the Premier League and assembling certain individuals that are sort of in values of in excess of £5-6 million, which is sort of not been a ballpark that Luton have ever been in. And I think kind of then coming back down to the Championship with Rob Edwards, they're sort of suffering a little bit of the hangover from that, I suppose, at the moment. And performance levels haven't been great by all accounts. Edwards under a little bit of pressure, maybe externally from certain elements of the fan base. So they don't come to Carrow Road with kind of that same feel that I've, in recent times, you look at Luton's sort of previous trips to Carrow Road. I think they've won 5 of the last 6 games against Norwich. So they've always been sort of that little bit of a bogey team maybe in recent times. And I sort of always felt in terms of team spirit, team unit, that they were always so strong. And, if you kind of almost succumbed to them and allowed them to score an early goal, it was always a bit of a battle to try and get back into the game. But they have a little bit more of a soft underbelly now, Sam. So what we sort of made of their season so far?
It's quite hard to really diagnose, but I can't say I'm especially surprised, because it doesn't feel like the sort of team that comes down and instantly has a right to just bounce straight back up. We saw Leicester last season, Southampton, those squads that have come down from being in the Premier League for a number of years and from having that experience. Luton didn't really have that. They went to the Premier League, and actually it was encouraging to see how they did it, because they made a few additions and looked to sign players who maybe could compete at that level, but they mainly stuck with the core that got them promoted. And actually at the moment it feels like unless you're able to spend 200 million literally, then sticking with that core is the best chance you have of staying up. And I think we saw that, because they were competing, they were in a relegation battle rather than just destined for relegation for a good portion of the season. But equally, when you go up and you go relatively close, but you do keep the same group that maybe will be deflated by coming down from the Premier League, then there can be a bit of a hangover. And I think we've definitely seen that. And the problem with them is when they play that style of play, it looks so bad when it doesn't go well. I don't think anyone's ever thought that Luton played especially beautiful football over the last few years, but when it goes well, you can see the quality of it, because it looks fast, it looks efficient, and ultimately it wins you games. But when it's not quite at that level and there isn't as much confidence in the group, it looks slow, it looks a bit aimless, and it looks a bit like the team doesn't really have any ideas other than to just chip it into the centre forward. So yeah, I think a few people maybe would have been able to see this coming from Luton, but I certainly didn't expect it to be to this extent. I didn't expect them to be sort of bottom half of the Championship table, even if I didn't think they'd be competing for automatic promotion. So what that tells me is that at some point they could click back into being a bit of being a better side at Championship level, and Norwich will just hope that it's not against them, because you'd say it has to happen eventually. But with so much negative momentum behind them, another pretty convincing loss against Leeds in midweek and only a couple of days to recover from that, you'd say that Norwich really should be expected to win this one. But again, they'll have to be on it, because at some point you'd expect Luton are going to look a bit more like the team that got promoted a couple of seasons ago, and I'm sure Norwich would be absolutely gutted for it to be against them. So yeah, definitely a different test in terms of how they play. Norwich will back themselves, but they'll also have to be quite wary.
Yeah, obviously still got some relatively good individuals at Championship level. Carlton Morris, obviously every Norwich fan will know about him and his backstory, given he was an FA Youth Cup winner while he was coming through the academy at Norwich, and only one senior appearance, and has gone on to play in the Premier League, score in the Premier League. So certainly got a decent calibre player there. Obviously Tim Krul's going to be in the Luton camp. I know he's not featured much for them, but got that Norwich connection. And even Joe Taylor, I think is the lad off the bench. He had a previous history of Kings Lynn, had a loan at Wroxham. So there's a few kind of Norfolk and Norwich connections in that Luton camp that will probably be hoping to maybe get the better of the Canaries on Saturday. Let's dip into a couple of comments before we maybe talk a little bit more around the game. Jeffman saying, wouldn't be surprised to see Fashnak off in January, not in the squad on Tuesday. Any idea if that was injury or selection? If Gordon goes back to Liverpool too, we'll definitely have to get another one in. Fashnak, there's a picture in our photo system. He was definitely at Carrow Road with the team walking towards the dressing room on Tuesday night. So I think that was probably more of a selection thing than an injury thing. It's certainly not something that Torp obviously brought up in the post-match for sort of, I suppose, an injury-related issue. So I think we'd have to assume that that's just purely a selection. And given, I suppose, they now have Onel Hernandez back available, obviously have Ashley Barnes in terms of more of an attacking outlet as well. It feels like maybe Fashnak is one that, given maybe a few quotes in the press as well in sort of the Switzerland end, I think I'd agree with you, Jeffman, there. Wouldn't be surprised to see him head back in January. I mean, in terms of him, Sam, and also Cade Gordon, I mean, both of them not massively in favour at the moment under Torp. I mean, Paddy actually did pose the question yesterday to Torp around Cade Gordon, and he sort of said, his mindset's open. He's, doing everything they want him to do. But again, one that's not quite working at the moment. So to me, not beyond the realms that they send him back in January.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's probably more cut and dried with Fastnacht, which is a strange position to be in, given he's actually a permanent Norwich City player. But as you said, it seems that at the Switzerland end, there's very much a significant interest in taking him back. I think Young Boys were the team linked, and to be honest, it's felt for a while like that's the sort of move that Fastnacht will make. So yeah, I think a Young Boys return in January, I would say, feels very likely around him, and I'm sure he's pleased that he's had a go at English football and that he's come and had this experience. But that probably does feel like the right move for his career, and I'm sure he'll go back and see the same sort of success that he had there previously. On Cade Gordon, I think it's more complicated than maybe I thought it was a couple of weeks ago, because the noises that you hear from behind the scenes suggest that maybe he's someone they don't feel is quite ready to play a regular starting role in the Championship. They took a bit of a gamble on him in January, having failed to get other targets, and maybe he hasn't come in and surprised them like I'm sure they were hoping he would. But as you said, Torp spoke about him yesterday and actually said that Norwich would be happy to have him around as long as he was still showing the right sort of attitude, that he still wanted to contribute in the right sorts of ways. And I suppose when you've got Sienats playing in that striking role, it does feel like there is a bit of room for some more depth at right wing. The only scenario where I saw it maybe happening for Norwich in January and them cancelling the loan would be if financially it would free them up to go and sign another one and to maybe try and improve on Gordon. But it sounds like from what Atanasio's spoken about, that finances aren't going to be an issue in this window until sort of profit and sustainability rules come into things. So yeah, I think the Gordon situation is one that it's hard to predict at the moment. You'd say that obviously Liverpool could step in and bring an end to it, but given the fact that he's had very little first team football in his career anyway, they might feel like this is quite a valuable learning experience. So yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. I would not be shocked at all if he went back to Liverpool, and probably if I had to guess, one side or the other now, I'd say he does. But equally, it feels from how Torp spoke yesterday like it's maybe less likely than I was expecting a couple of weeks ago. And I suppose Torup is right, unless a player is causing problems and has an attitude problem, and maybe the fact that they're out of the team is upsetting the rest of the group, then, you may as well keep them around for a bit of depth. But yeah, it doesn't sound like they feel like he's quite ready to play that role just yet. And it'll be interesting to see where they go in January. But yeah, the right wing position and how he reflected on that as a whole actually was quite interesting. It's clearly an area, even though Amanko Forsen has looked okay in that position in the last couple of games, it's still an area that they feel can be improved upon and that they don't feel they have a sort of solid option for. So definitely that's a situation to watch out for. I'd say Fastnat probably does go back, and then Gordon will be an interesting one to follow.
Yeah, it certainly felt like in the summer they wanted to do a permanent addition there when they sold Abu Kamara. Obviously, the time frame didn't really allow it. They had to go down the loan route. And I think Ben Doak was actually the one they wanted, and he wanted to stay up north and obviously join Middlesbrough. And I think we've maybe seen now that that's one that I think we'd have all maybe preferred to have seen at Carrow, given his form for Borough. But these things sometimes work out, sometimes they don't. And at the moment, it's just not quite working for Kate Gordon. We'll be live for sort of another 10 or 15 minutes. So any more sort of comments, questions, score predictions, get them down and we'll work our way through. Harry saying if we score early, it'll be similar to Tuesday night. Jake saying Kenny makes a huge difference. Whilst we won 6-1, there were periods of play where we were very sloppy. And to be fair to Torup, I think he was quite sort of open and honest about that. He sort of said even when they were 2-0 up and sort of, obviously allowed Plymouth back into the game, that sort of latter stages of the first half, they did sort of sit back a little bit again, and it wasn't quite as sort of on the front foot, in terms of chance creation and being as open, as expansive in terms of the way they were playing as maybe it was in the first 20 minutes. So I suppose there is areas still in this game, Sam, that Norwich can look at that Plymouth game and still improve, because, I think any team that thinks they've cracked it at 6-1 at home is still going to be a little bit naive.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how Torup's spoken about it at various times this season when they've done well. I think in the press conference yesterday, he also said that he hates himself for the whole game when Kenny McLean got booked late on, and now he's only one yellow card away from a suspension. So clearly a bit of a perfectionist there, but I think we've seen, across football that those are the people who tend to find success. And, absolutely no doubt Norwich will leave no stone unturned trying to improve this team as much as possible. And I'm pretty sure if they were top of the table by 10 points at this stage, Torup will still be saying there are ways that they can improve and they can do better. So, I think that attitude is actually quite encouraging to see. And it's good to see that recognition because, as Jake mentioned, it wasn't a perfect performance against a pretty poor Plymouth side. It was a very good performance, and I think a better performance than many people expected given the number of injury problems that they've had. But it was one where there were areas they could have done better from, where they made mistakes. And you look at that, you look at the fact that within those players on that pitch, they could have improved, they could have played better. And they've got Josh Sargent, who is probably the best striker in the Championship when he's fit. He wasn't involved. They've got Marcelino Nunez, one of the best midfielders in the Championship, and he wasn't involved either. You'd say the ceiling on this Norwich team is much higher than even a 6-1 win. So, that was really encouraging to see, actually, in a way, that there's still room for improvement and that Norwich can still get much better. And when you look at the table, you'd say, given the eventual goal is obviously promotion to the Premier League, that improvement will be needed. But right now they have a bit of time to try to work on those things and to level the team up bit by bit. And for me, it feels like Torup is the ideal man to do that because, as I said, he seems to have a bit of a perfection mindset at the moment.
He does indeed. There's a question as well from Neil on X saying, any update on the Gunn contract? Arguably the second most important contract extension required. I mean, we spoke there a little bit about them trying to do Borja Sainz, and obviously that's obvious why they're going to do that in terms of his value and his performance levels at the moment. His top goal scorer in the Championship. I think he's got the most amount of goals across everyone in the Football League. So, there's obviously a clear reasoning behind that. In terms of Angus Gunn, have you heard sort of any more noises around his future, Sam? Because I think there probably will be a few fans a little bit concerned because you look at kind of getting towards January, maybe they can soon start to speak to other clubs given that he's out of contract in the summer.
Yeah, still seems fairly quiet, which is interesting. From what we've heard, it sounds like he's very much interested in signing a new contract at the club, and that's something that he'd be open to. But the finances are as we've always said, a situation for Norwich to deal with. They've got a situation where, yes, they are backed by a little bit more money with Mark Attanasio, but they do need to stay within those profit and sustainability rules. And it isn't just a bottomless pit of money. There's a bit of money available, but ultimately, if they feel they can get a better option for less money, then that's what they'll do. What I'd say is that he's so important to that team, and we saw how important he is when George Long came in for a few games, that it feels like an investment that Norwich will be weighing up, and I'm sure it's a decision they're sort of thinking about and talking about at the moment. But yeah, it still feels fairly quiet, so it will be interesting to see how that situation develops with Angus Gunn. But yeah, somebody who I'm sure is very interested in staying at the club. So I suppose the ball is in Ben Napper's court and in Norwich City's court to make something happen. But there's no doubt that after the last few weeks, they'll have seen what a good goalkeeper he is and how important he is. Now it's just about the finances and if they can be at the right level for everyone involved.
Yeah, obviously, I suppose before I get your prediction and maybe how you view the game on Saturday, just in terms of maybe this upcoming run of games, we did speak a little bit around kind of how crucial December could be, but it feels like the picture has completely flipped since even last week where we were speaking around it, because Norwich have put 4 points on the board. They're only 5 points back off the playoffs again, where, this is the mad world of the Championship. Had Norwich have lost to Plymouth the other night, Plymouth would have been above them. And subsequently since then, Rooney's been under fire a bit from Plymouth fans. And I think I've seen their sort of fans maybe angry towards ownership and all sorts. It just shows that, how sort of big every game is in terms of the wider picture. So I suppose now, how big is, this game on Saturday, but then even after that, 2 games against, teams that are in the relegation zone at the moment at QPR and at Portsmouth, it feels like opportunity knocks for Norwich.
It definitely does, and all of a sudden, it's mad, as you said, how things can change so quickly. And I've seen plenty of fans. I think there are some in the comment section today, but also across social media talking about playoffs and about whether Norwich can compete for those. And it feels like with such an open division, aside from maybe 1 or 2 teams who are opening up a lead at the top, there really is an opportunity for everyone in this league. And Norwich at the moment, with some of the momentum that they've got, the players that they've got in form, the fact they've got Josh Sargent still to come back in, and as you said, those fixtures, they will feel like there's a bit of an opportunity there. And actually, it was something interesting that Jack Stacey said to me when I spoke to him after West Brom. He said that players in their careers don't really have time for, to write seasons off for transition. They want to be achieving every season that they possibly can, and they want to have a focus on the short term and winning games, in the near future. So I'm sure those players are looking at it as much as they know there's a long-term strategy going on around them, and I'm sure they have a bit of patience themselves. They'll be looking at it thinking, in terms of how they can affect results, they'll be looking at those games going, yeah, they can reinsert themselves back into that playoff race. And from a position where we were talking about reminders of the transition and the dampening down of the optimism in the last few weeks, it feels like along with that positive feeling, there is a weight of expectation already there. And when you look at those fixtures, I wasn't aware, maybe obviously I knew what fixtures were coming up, but without knowing the Championship inside out and the results that have been happening, I wasn't aware that actually it was laid out that nicely for Norwich over the next few weeks. But it does feel like they've got an opportunity there. So if they could pick up the results that probably their performances would warrant, if they could reproduce those West Brom and Plymouth games, then they would have Sargent coming back for when those fixtures get a little bit tougher and when they can see that end goal a little bit closer. And I think that would end up actually, although the team and the setup and the tactics and the feeling would be very different, it would be almost a similar situation to last season when obviously they did end up qualifying for the playoffs and it was fairly comfortable in the end as well. So yeah, definitely something that they'll be aware of, something that they'll be looking ahead to. And although we all know the importance of the bigger picture, it's good to see that within a week of everything feeling quite miserable, that we can be talking about playoffs already and what Norwich could achieve.
Yeah, it certainly feels like the momentum has completely shifted. Hopefully they can build off that, of course. Tomorrow, there's a few, these sort of shows always end in some kind of mad fashion, particularly when Jeffman's about. His question is as follows: what's your favourite component of the full English / what components would each player be? McLean the Beans, the heart of the midfield / the Brekkie, Borja Bangers, and there's a score prediction there already for a 3-1 Norwich win tomorrow. Jake, maybe a little bit harsh, long, fried egg, predictably sloppy. So, I mean, Sam, in terms of your favourite component, where's your head at in terms of that question?
It's actually quite a tough question, because from a point where like a full English used to feel like quite a rare treat, because it's quite a big thing to cook for yourself when you work on a Saturday, to now the position where obviously we stay at hotels quite a lot for away games and stuff, and I've had so many full Englishes, so many dry sausages and chewy bits of bacon. It's quite hard, but I will say one that doesn't always pop up, and that's hash browns. I really, really like a hash brown, and probably the fact that not every single hotel in the land serves them for breakfast means that they're sort of a relatively rare treat. So I'd go for hash browns, but the problem then comes in terms of which player that would be represented by. I suppose, given that it is quite rare, I would normally say like a bit of flair. But Jeffman's already taken Borja Bangers, and given he's the sort of flair man, I don't know what to do with that. So maybe Anis Ben Slimani, he likes a little bit of a flick and a trick from time to time, and a step over. So maybe Slimani is the hash browns, but that might be a bit of a reach. But yeah, that was a long way of saying that hash browns are my favourite part of an English breakfast. What about you, Adam? It's strange we haven't already had this conversation, given the number of breakfasts that me and you have shared.
Yeah, that's really put us on the spot. I mean, in terms of a hash brown, I think kind of the crisp nature of a hash brown lends myself to Marcelino Nunez and his crisp ability to find a pass. So I think he's maybe that component of the full English. I think black pudding is actually one of my more favourite components. It's one of those, again, you don't always get it at every hotel, but it's always a sign of a good breakfast. I suppose, given maybe the hearty and northern feel of a black pudding, I suppose you'd have to lend yourself to someone who's maybe more northern. So let's go for, I don't think it's northern in the Norwich camp at the moment. I suppose go for a Grant Hanley or...
There's not that many of them. Long is from like Yorkshire or something, isn't he? Then you've got McLean, but obviously he's the Beans apparently. So yeah, I think it's going to have to be Hanley, isn't it?
I think we'll go with Hanley. Yeah, and of course, if you're watching this on repeat, you want to lend yourself to answer that question, please get it down in the comments. We'd be intrigued to know your take. Sam, let's take it back to a slightly more serious point now. Prediction: how do you see the game going tomorrow? Norwich obviously looking to try and build off 4 points so far this week. It feels like if they could get 7, that would be a really positive return for the sort of full week, and it feels like maybe the momentum and the fan mood is completely lifted again. Obviously, vice versa, if it goes the other way tomorrow, then it kind of maybe looks a little bit more of an average week in terms of the points haul. So, prediction, how do you see it unfolding? Yeah,
I said 6 points on the last Pinkham podcast, and I'm going to stick with that. They've got the first 3 against Plymouth, and I think they'll get another 3 against Luton, given that terrible away record and the momentum that Norwich seems to have, the players that they've got coming back, and the recent performances. It feels like everything is going in their direction going into this game. So maybe that's a little bit of a worry if you're a more pessimistic person. But yeah, I think Norwich are going to win this one. And actually, I think it might be a bit reminiscent of a game that I saw you put a clip out of on the Pink and X feed, and I'm sure our other social media, of when Norwich won 3-0 and Teemu Pukki scored or finished off a lovely team move. So yeah, I actually think Norwich are in for another comfortable win. I'm going to say 3-0. I don't know. I was going to say, I hope you're as optimistic as me, Adam, but that's pretty up there. So how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, well, I said 4 points on the recent podcast, but I think that was probably more with the view that they would just have a comfortable evening against Plymouth, maybe not kind of showboat the manner they did and win that game as comfortably as they did, perform to the levels they did. And obviously you consider kind of the amount of players they've got back since then. I think my positivity has maybe grown even more throughout the week, to the point where now I'm going to change that prediction and go for a 6-point week in terms of the 2 home games. So going to predict a Norwich win tomorrow afternoon. And I'm actually with Jeffman in terms of 3-1 Norwich. That was what I went for on a Luton podcast I'd done last night. Just think, Norwich, not that they've been frail in terms of defence, but as we saw on Tuesday night, just that minor mistake. There's been a few of those still sort of within recent performances. So hopefully that's something they can sort of eradicate moving forwards. But just think that Luton, there's a few individuals in their team, certainly from a physical point of view. You look at Adebayo and Morris, they're sort of different strikers to maybe what Norwich have dealt with in recent games. So I'd maybe back one of those two to do a job. Hopefully not Vincent in terms of the along come Norwich. We've kind of reeled off plenty of stats throughout this show, and they all maybe lend themselves to a Norwich win, but I'm always a little bit apprehensive to sort of, I suppose make a mark and say that Norwich will do the job. Yes, Jeff, and we've always liked sausage roll chat on these shows. I'm sure there'll be one posted on your X account tomorrow afternoon from Carrow Road, so hopefully that will be a 10 out of 10 solid performance from the sausage roll and 10 out of 10 performance from Norwich City tomorrow afternoon. So I think with that, that's probably enough from us this lunchtime. Hopefully you've enjoyed the chat and maybe kind of get your comments and questions sort of down in the comment section below. Obviously, we'll still read those after this has finished being live. Plenty of good content coming your way across our channels, of course, as well. And there is plenty already on there. So if you want to go and check out all our pre-Luton coverage, you can. So we've got Terrace Talk with a Luton fan. Sam's Tactics board's gone up relatively recently, which is a little bit more of a deeper dive into how the midfield might shape up tomorrow and kind of those debates we had a little bit earlier on in the show around the sort of fullback roles and Luton as well, their strengths and weaknesses. So that's well worth checking out as well. Of course, we were down at Colney yesterday, so the full press conference with Johannes Hoff-Torp is available now to go and watch. There's also a few offers and sort of bits I need to talk around. We've got a flash sale on at the moment. Obviously, it's Black Friday, so Norwich, we're doing a little deal where you can get, I think it's 14 months of content for only £15, which is sort of over 50% off. Or you can, if you're sort of reluctant maybe to commit to that sort of length of tenure, we obviously hope that you would in the future, but we've also got a deal of £3 for 3 months. You can give it a little try and see what you think. We think it's, unbelievable value anyway. So particularly now you're getting an even better offer with Christmas around the corner. I'm sure you've got plenty of Norwich fans in your family that you're wondering what to buy them. So we think that's well worth well worth checking out, particularly given the offer. And we've also got a little competition element of that as well. If you're a subscriber, an existing subscriber or a new subscriber, we've got 2 hospitality tickets for Norwich's clash against Swansea City at Carrow Road. I think it's the end of January. So you'd be entered into the hat to potentially win that. So even more of an incentive there to come and join the journey. We've also had a bit of a celebration on the Pink and YouTube channel this week. We finally hit the milestone, 10,000 subscribers. I think we sort of hope to hit it by the end of the year. So we're sort of a month further ahead than where we thought we might be. So of course, that goes without saying. Thank you for your support of every piece of content we produce on this channel. And, if you're not already subscribed, why not go and hit that subscribe button? We're now obviously on the road to 15, 20,000, whatever it might be. We always set the bar quite high. So, say thank you for your support, and we're going to do a little sort of giveaway around that as well in pretty sort of near in the near future. So well worth kind of keeping your eyes locked to our socials and potentially the next podcast, because I think we might hint at kind of what you need to do to try and win what we're gonna throw up as a competition prize. So of course we've also got the WhatsApp channel, Blue Sky, X, Twitter, not formerly Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I lose track of every social channel we've got. Plenty of good stuff anyway across all there. So we'll be at Carrow Road tomorrow lunchtime, all your usual match coverage across our channels. Hopefully it's going to be another 3 points for Norwich, as of course we are on the road to 1 million, I suppose, on YouTube as well. We're a little way away from that yet, but we think the content's probably worthy of that. Anyway, that's enough from us this lunchtime. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. If you're heading to Carrow Road, obviously, hopefully it's going to be a positive performance from the Canaries and another vital 3 points.